So let's talk about USPTO and the role in IP in business. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about leveraging IP for business success. Um, this is a good slide that gives you an overview of the data that you see behind IP. This was actually a survey or report done by the Department of Commerce. It kind of illustrates just how strong IP is within the US. So in 2004, there was more than 27 million IP intensive jobs. These are direct jobs correlated with IP. 38% of US GDP included IP intensive industries. 6.6 trillion value added of IP industries. So that gives you a good number of how strong the value of IP is within the overall economy. I do like this one. Average weekly wage workers of IP industries receive 1,300 per week. It's actually higher now. We do have some more updated stats that I've actually seen. We haven't been able to put them on a slide for presentation view, but you do see what I've seen is you do see an increase on IP continuing to trend. And this one I do like just because workers that are involved with IP tend to get paid higher at 46% higher rate. So it just kind of shows, you're in the IP industry, you're in a good industry, you're typically getting higher, and there's more value added to the economy as well. We have 115 billion revenue specific for IP licensing rights, and 28 industries derive revenue from licensing. It does give you a good overview, like I was saying, of how strong IP is within the US. We do actually have PAR reports that we publish every year. So at the end of every fiscal year, we have what the PAR reports are, accountability reports that we report to Congress, and we actually also share them with the public. So if you're ever interested in kind of looking up some of this data, some of the trends that we have going within the IP world within the US, because the USPTO only really watches over US territories and states. You can access the PAR report in our website, and I'm sure Dimple can put it in the chat for you guys to access as well. But those are good statistics. Like I said, we're very transparent, so we do give that information out for individuals so you can see. That's a big question that we always get is, IP that is still trending? Is just what's the volume? It's still going up, and yes, it continues to go up here at USPTO. We continue to hire individuals. We're a fee-based agency. So what that means is we don't derive from taxpayer funding to operate. We actually operate based off fees that we collect from patent and trademark applications. And we continue to increase, like I was saying, and it's a good sign of the economy, and IP and the economy go hand in hand, like we'll talk about today. It goes into correlation. So it's good to see something that, how strong IP can do. So I've been here with USPTO only for about a year and a half. So my world's a little bit different from everybody else. I actually get to interact a little bit more with IP. I know when I was with the SBA, I was doing more economic development, more small business interaction, and I, interacted with IP from time to time, basic education. But coming over here to USPTO, there's a lot of more knowledge to learn. You start peeling back peels and you start understanding IP to a different level. So I kind of wanted to show that today in the presentations. And I wanted to talk about a story, which is the Gatorade story. It kind of highlights that example. So there's a lot of lessons that can be learned through this business success story. So one of the things that I like about it is that the cycle of innovation and ecosystem gets highlighted in this story. So in no particular order, it includes the new idea, research and development, IP strategy, funding, marketing, licensing, commercialization, revenue, and jobs, which is economic development, with IP really attached to all of it. So football ended. So I'm glad that we got somebody from the Dallas area quarterback to win the Super Bowl. But it kind of shows you the Gatorade then branded into the NFL, into to really sports in general. And when you see these players getting showered, you see it with Gatorade. And it's kind of good to reflect back and see how this story was developed. So, and it's really it got developed in a very unique way, and that's why I wanted to show this story and how IP was important to the Gatorade story. Like I said, we'll be going over this one as an example and talking about IP within the strategy itself. So the story goes in 1966, the University of Florida, Dr. Robert Cade created Gatorade for the University of youth football team, the Gators. It started with a group of scientists recognizing the problem and determining a way in solving them. A new idea, which like you guys experience as small businesses and entrepreneurs, it always starts off with the idea. This is the most common theme of success, inventions and innovators. So the football team, University of Florida, they're having the issue of players passing out. Florida, just like Texas, is very hot. They kept on getting dehydrated from extreme summer heat. Then there was the research and development. Dr. Cade and three other scientists asked themselves, there must be a better way. Something better that helped the body recover faster to replace carbohydrates and electrolytes lost through sweating in the intense Florida heat. So through research and development, Gatorade was developed and patented. Apparently, the better version of Gatorade tasted horribly, and the athletes threw up all over the field. So it wasn't very good tasting on the first versions of Gatorade. Dr. Kate's wife, actually, she's the one that suggested to add some lime juice to make it taste better. So that's where you get the original flavor of lemon lime, which is actually my favorite. And it's still actually the most popular within the consumers. So behind this patent idea, Gatorade contains sodium, potassium, sucrose, and it's described in British patent number 1,252,781. So one of the things for patents is when you have a patent, when you get something patented, you disclose it completely. So you have to keep that in consideration in case you didn't know. Looking at this patent document, the table shows that the athletes' blood volume compared to with drinking water versus Gatorade. So how athletes can benefit from drinking Gatorade, indicating their ability to recover faster during a workout. The drink is nothing more than sugar and electrolytes. A simple ingredient that was highly cost effective. So it's definitely, keep that in mind. It was patented, and it was it was used to develop a really solve a problem within the University of Florida. So what are some of the advantages of obtaining a patent? Increased likelihood of additional patents. You do one and you learn the system, you go through that learning curve, you're more than likely going to go after more patents. As you get familiar with the patent process and system, inherently the patent quality goes up as well. So your quality of patents goes up, and you're able to develop better content itself. You're able to access capital. So this is a good one, and I always share this as an example: is Shark Tank. You're able to see the sharks or the venture capitalists, the investors, to always, if they see a product that can't be patentable, they always ask for that, and they ask for that because they understand the value of a patent. They understand that if you have a patent, that will help you exclude others from using your similar product. So it's good to understand that because that's the big advantage of an individual may have. We actually work a lot around the year with educational programs, incubators, business competitions. And I do see that those individuals that do have patents just tend to do a lot better because I said it just adds tremendous value to their idea. and it certainly, can reward investors as well. So it's all about money and return on investment for investors. So they understand that tremendously. Uh, of course, there are downsides of patents and the process itself. Like it takes too long, but it's something that you have to consider when you're waging that. And we actually have patency times within our website that can show you how long we're taking with patents and to process your patent application. So it's something that we disclose as well. So keep that into consideration when you're dealing with an idea that you may want to patent. Uh, it's on average, I think the first action, just to give you an example, is about 18 months. So you will be looking at a couple years more than likely to get a patent actually for your idea or product or service. So keep that into accountability when you're doing a patent application. Um, because if it's a simple patent, it'll get processed in a different way than it would if you're dealing with something that's brand new and innovative and requires more work itself. I think I got disconnected. Can you guys see me still?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. At that, I don't think you missed much. I was just kind of blabbing about patent times, anyways. But yes, I'm back. One of the cons of working from home, right? The internet. So let's go on to the next slide. Some more patent advantages. Um, you do see more uh, success, especially for small businesses in the first 5 years when once they receive their first patent. So um, our USPTO economic working paper highlights that 36% of employment increases and 51% increase in sales growth. So like I said, it just correlates. You get a patent, you tend to be a lot more successful. So let's talk about facilitating access to funding. There's an increase of probability of venture capital funding. Investors prefer non-provisional patents. Which one of the things that you want to understand is what a provisional patent is and a non-provisional patent. You actually start to see this a lot more with Shark Tank. I think at the beginning, a lot of people are familiar with Shark Tank. That's why I use that as an example. But at the beginning of the seasons, they would have just asked for a provisional or they had a patent. Now they're specifically asking if it's a non-provisional patent, and that's the more permanent one. The provisional patent only gives you a hold per se. So that's something that investors look highly into. And when my experience, when I used to work at SBA, we used to see a lot of this with SBA and SBI, the SBIR, STTR programs, which if you're not familiar, they're programs that help, the government helps funding with research and development. And if you have patents, you tend to get more later funding in rounds of funding per se. So you do get a 50% increase in probability of venture capitalist funding, a small increase in likelihood of a seed round funding, which I think it was like 2%, but you do see an increase there, and 47% increase in probability of second round funding. So like I said, especially when I used to work with SBA, the SBIR programs, SBIR and SCTR programs, really reflected this because, the government wants to see you commercialize those projects and ideas that you're working on, especially if you have the good for the common public. So it's definitely something that provides economic development and it helps in the transition having bans because that way we know it's protected within the United States. So it also rewards investors, things like increase of probability in IPO and or acquisitions. So you do 150% increase in probability of IPO based on our data and 84% increase in probability of IPO or acquisition. So just keep into mind, having A good IP portfolio would help you just increase your chances of success. So, okay, let's go back to the Gatorade story. So after patenting their idea, Dr. Cade and the three other scientists, obviously not in business for, nor had a roadmap to taking their product into the marketplace. Um, in fact, Dr. Cade and the three other scientists went to the University of Florida asking, here's the new idea, run with it. But the university at the time thought the doctors were nuts because they were not in the soft drink business or industry. So they didn't really understand the value and the commercialization side of it as well. Um, so I would add that a lot of universities now have tech transfer programs who can help with spinning off ideas and inventions through research and development of their undergrad, graduate, and professors. We actually work a lot with these programs, the tech transfer programs, because they tend to be very involved in IP. So that's another change that you also see through the ages is even universities and these organizations are able to capitalize on incubations such as their professors and their undergrads, which is good to see. So in terms of funding, marketing, commercialization, Dr. Cade and the three other scientists had no idea. They're good at what they do, their specialty itself. But remember that Dr. Cade and the three other scientists uh, did have their ideas patented. So I would also mention that since this was their first patent, they obtained more patents and trademarks to protect their IP, making further improvements over the existing ideas. So they continued to build their IP portfolio, and not only with the first patent that they got, but continued to receive more. So at this junction, you have to wonder what should have been done. Establish IP programs to identify, protect, and use the IP you have developed, including things like invention disclosure systems, licensing, enforcement strategies, IP portfolio management, and trade secret theft program. This is something that you have to consider when you're developing an IP program. So the first step, is always identifying what you have. You have to really understand it to be able to identify it. That's one of the reasons why we do this training with the SBDCs is because we want not only the advisors to understand, but the small business community to understand what IP is. And then after that, you can protect it and use it to develop an IP strategy. So it's very important, working with the legal system, working with attorneys. This is something that you have to understand you have it uh, in order to protect it. It's a lot of times, somebody may get sued per se, and they never knew this trade secret or they never really had any process to protect it. So it's good to have that mentality of IP and the value behind it. Sometimes you just don't know really what the value is, and you actually get this a lot in copyrights. Um, Copyrights, artists, they tend to draw. I use the comics, Marvel comics, for example. Stan Lee didn't really understand the value behind it at the beginning, but it tends, there he puts a certain value in the artwork itself, but now, with the Disney acquisitions, you see it become a multi-billion-dollar industry. I know there's some going around with the family and so on, but even then you can see that the copyrights, becoming an IP portfolio, and he understood that. He put a value on it. I don't think he imagined the multi-billion-dollar industry that he was gonna create, but he was very involved in understanding it and protecting it. Um, but just keep that into consideration. Another thing to take into consideration is, are you working with universities or a government entity? And have you considered the ownership in the following context? So in 1966, Dr. Cade comes to an agreement with Stokely Van Camp, SVC, to produce the already patent product. At this point, SVC should consider IP ownership in the following context. joint development agreement, tech transfer ability, ownership of the work developed by the professors and students. Um, since they're coming into this partnership, this is something that needs to be talked about, mentioned, and agreed upon. So in 1967, the Gators began to officially drink Gatorade. So they beat Georgia Tech for the first Orange Bowl title. And in 1969, the Kansas City Chiefs began to drink Gatorade, and which they attribute to their Super Bowl title that year. So here's a fun one. Elvis Presley drinks Gatorade on stage in 1970, taking a zip between the songs, saying, "This is Gatorade, in case you want to aid your Gator." So as you can see, Gatorade is starting to develop not only in athletics, but in the entertainment life. But as I told you earlier, the university thought that Dr. Cade was nuts when they presented their invention. So now, well, the university came back to the scientists because the creation of Gatorade was done while they were employed with them, or they have realized that there's a lot of money to be made here. So in the end, the university got a piece of Gatorade royalties. The university would take 20% of the disbursement, a very big piece. And this really comes down to the employer contracts that you may have. Uh, so they always keep that into consideration. It's very dependent. Employees, independent contractors are different, but the contracts individuals have for services is something that needs to be paid attention to. So in 1973, SVC and Dr. Cade settled a lawsuit with the University of Florida. The university claims they own the rights to the Gatorade formula. From that day on, the university receives over $80 million in royalties. So just a perfect example of how it gets executed in the real world. In 1983, Quaker Oats wins the bidding war with rival Pillsbury and buys SVC. At this junction, you have to consider things under purchasing or selling a company or a line of business. Things including transfer of intellectual property assets and the associated rights, chain of title for the intellectual property assets, chain of title. Uh, you may not not change chain representations and warranties securing the intellectual property right, and third-party rights encumbering the IP assets. So just things to take into consideration when you're purchasing or selling a business, having the IP right itself. Jawbone is actually a classic example of this. Their company was in the downfall, and they had IP that had a lot of value. So smart investors actually recognized that and was able to capitalize on the IP portfolio that they had. So if you're ever interested in kind of learning about Jawbone itself, I don't know if you remember that company, understand that it was the purchasing of the IP portfolios that made that story so tremendous itself. So let's go on to the next slide. So in the 1980s, Pepsi received license manufacturing of Gatorade in some of the world networks. Now, at this junction, Pepsi should be concerned about how they would deal with IP ownership in the employment context, things like former employees, current employees, and contractors. So this is where it starts, IP starts to hit different hands, especially around the world. So even here locally, something that to take into consideration. I see this more with restaurants. So individuals, especially the small business community entrepreneurs, they innovate, how to do a new hot dog or burger differently. Then, I mean, they may not be specific items, that are innovative or new, but maybe the process of the way they cook the hot dog or the burger itself, they marinate it to a certain degree, the spices that they use, those can be considered trade secrets. So having things process in place to help you protect that comes a long way. So this is where having an IP attorney helps to help develop contracts, for your employees itself. So it's something to consider tremendously, especially if you're in the trade or the trade secret area, which I see a lot in the restaurants, and a lot of people sometimes don't recognize that. So in 2001, Pepsi wins a bidding war with Coca-Cola and acquires Quaker Oats. Now here, Pepsi should have checked IP rights when operating a business in the following context: joint development agreements, IP licenses, procurement agreements, and purchase orders with suppliers and vendors. IP insurance, yeah, you can get IP insurance. So part of a Bell team, I'm not sure if you heard that acronym before, or your banker and accountant insurance and legal teams. You can also get IP insurance. Last but not least, non-disclosure agreements. This can also come in with confidentiality agreements. So learn about those tools, especially with your attorney, with your legal team, because they can help you protect your IP asset tremendously. Like I said, you can build processes, but having these NDAs, having these confidentiality agreements, they help out tremendously. There's also like non-compete clauses or agreements that you can do, but that one kind of differs more with competition, but just kind of things to take into consideration and why you should seek legal counsel. So next slide. So this may not be permanent to the Gatorade story, but if your IP deals with obligation for software that you purchase or license, you should consider things like audits and report requirements, usage of open source software, and other agreements and licensing. Um, my specialty is not really in copyrights or really the USPTO, but we do have a sister agency, the U.S. Copyright Office, and we actually also do have IP attorneys that have backgrounds in copyrights. So we can also set you up and help you educate on copyrights a little bit further. So in this slide, you see a checklist that we put together, pretty much an overview of the slides that we're just talking about. And it gives you a good overview of things to consider, and be able to check off of. Um, I don't know if I think I shared it with Regina, and I think she shared it with you guys already. If we haven't, just let us know. We'll be more than happy to send this IP checklist for you guys to have and reference. It's also on our website, but it's probably easier just to email Regina or myself and to help you with this. So you're probably wondering, what did Dr. K do after his Gatorade success story? Um, Later, the Gatorade money helped lay the groundwork for other life-saving medicines as they continued their work in inventing and creating new ideas in the medical field. By the way, Gatorade currently generates a huge revenue. It's about a $2 billion drink industry company. So it's still something that was developed, from the startup. It's just a really good story of how IP within the business strategy gets developed and not just not being able to recognize it at the beginning. So I'll leave you guys with this question. Where do IP rights come into play? Remember, Gatorade wasn't perfect. After all, Dr. Cade and the three other scientists had no idea how to manufacture, market, and commercialize their patent idea. The University of Florida didn't know what to do with their employees' new invention. SVC and Quaker Oats couldn't sustain the product, at least the potential for the Gatorade products. So if you're starting your own business, take a look into stories that are similar to your business concept. For example, if you're a chip manufacturer, look into Intel and AMD. If you're a restaurant owner, if you're looking to commercialize, franchise out, looking to expand, look into like Taco Bell, McDonald's, Chipotle. Similar, look into Costco and Sam's in the distribution logistics field. And electric vehicle companies, look into Tesla, Rivian, Lucid. Do some research on the companies and learn from their success, their mistakes. As you're working with startups, entrepreneurs, and small business owners, make sure they learn more about IP so they can make informed decisions to be successful. And this is really one of our critical goals here at USPTO is help individuals not only understand IP, but IP within business, IP trends, IP as we see it in the world changes with a lot of legislation changes as well. So we try to educate the public on that. And we do it from large companies to small businesses and entrepreneurs. But at least as business is growing, you may want to adapt existing patent ideas, software, hire employees, adopt new business models, and able to recognize forms of intellectual property. Try to add the value to your business plan and how to protect it. Most importantly, be able to distinguish what's yours and what's not. Remember, IP, patents, trademarks, trade secrets, and copyrights are an asset as business grows, and it tremendously adds value to your business. And this graph right here is just a good visual of how different industries interact with different organizations, like I was talking throughout the presentation. So with that being said, here's my information. Feel free to give us um, contact us, send us an email. We love talking to small businesses and entrepreneurs, especially with IP. You may not want to disclose your information to the general public, like in this public setting, but we'll definitely set away some time with trademark experts, copyright experts, patent experts within our office to help you and guide you better to understand. Now, we do draw a line with legal advice, so that's where we won't be able to do. We can't give the legal advice an IP attorney would, but we definitely educate you and help you understand the process and guide you so you can make informative decisions.